I'm Councilmember Jose Huizar. I've been joined by Councilmember Englander, and we will begin the meeting for the Public Works Committee to take up items 1 and 2. Soon thereafter, we will have a joint Public Works Budget and Finance Committee meeting to take up items 3, 4, and 5. Anybody wishing to speak on any items or on the public comment section of this committee, you can pick up a speaker's card to the person on my left, with the person on my left. And at this time, I guess, why don't we take up item number 1?
And item number 1 is a communication from the mayor relative to the appointment of Mr. John Choi to the Board of Public Works Commissioners.
Now come up, Mr. Choi. Welcome. This is a committee of the Public Works Committee. 2 of the 3 members are present, and you could just briefly let the committee know what are your qualifications for this position, and secondly, what you intend to accomplish at the board.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, council members. Thank you for allowing me a few minutes to speak. I'm excited and truly honored to be nominated to the Public Works Commission. I've been an Angelino for many years now, and like so many other Angelinos, I'm an immigrant who has found a permanent home here in the City of Angels. I was actually born in Seoul, South Korea, and less than a year after my birth, my parents, mother and father, got on a plane, leaving behind their toddler daughter and their infant son, and came to Los Angeles with the dream of creating a better life for themselves and for their children here in the City of Angels. More than a year later, when I was 2, my parents came back to Korea, and we immigrated together as a family, initially touching down first in Koreatown, and then settling in Highland Park. Although I spent most of my childhood growing up in Orange County, I found my way back to my original hometown of LA when I enrolled at UCLA, where I'd go on to earn both my undergraduate and law degrees. I mentioned my parents in this story about my background because it was really from them that I learned that helping people is honorable. It was because of their story and our experience as an immigrant family that I decided I wanted to give back to the people of LA. My first full-time job was actually working in a council office where I spent my days delivering the basic city services that Angelinos rely on to maintain a decent quality of life. Graffiti, potholes, bulky items, tree trimming, street lights, sidewalk repair. I spent countless hours walking and driving neighborhoods, seeing firsthand what residents were dealing with. I dedicated time to meet with agency staff to collaborate on the most efficient ways to deal with issues in our district. And the basic lesson I learned that I'll never forget was that no matter the neighborhood, no matter the skin color, the story walking into every home was the same. I want my trash picked up on time, I want my neighborhood to be safe and clean, and I want to be treated with respect. I've spent the last few years working on behalf of working families throughout LA County, serving as Economic Development Director for the Los Angeles County Federation of Labor. The primary focus of my work there involved building coalitions with business, environmental, and community-based organizations to move policies and projects that led to the creation or preservation of good jobs. It's these types of experiences and sensibilities that I believe will serve me well as a member of the Public Works Commission. Clearly, we're in challenging times, but the city services that the Department of Public Works delivers touches every business and every resident of Los Angeles. And with that contact comes a tremendous opportunity to help shape LA's future. It's my priority to maintain the level of city services that Angelinos receive on a daily basis, but it's my passion to build upon the great work of this commission by helping to lead the effort to make LA the greenest, most efficient, and stable public works department in the country. Again, I'm truly honored by the nomination. I thank you for your time and look forward to working with each of you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that great overview, and I think you said it well. One of the most basic things that the public depends on for the city are when you walk out that door and what you see out there, whether the trees are trimmed, streets are resurfaced, sidewalks repaired, trash is being picked up. This committee, as you know, oversees many of those items. It is the only full-time paid commission that we have for the city, and given that it is, we put additional value in the work you're doing because of that. So I think you have a great background and know a lot about how this city functions, and you would make a great contribution to this commission. So you got my full support. Mr. Englander, any questions, comments?
Just a couple comments. John, I've known you for for many years. I think you're fantastic. I think you'd be great on the commission, and I know you're doing it for the right reasons. As my colleague has said, it's one of the most important functions we've got here in the city of Los Angeles, is caring for our communities and making sure that we invest in infrastructure and repairing our streets and trimming our trees. And I know that, and just hearing your life story, I didn't know a lot about that history. So thank you for sharing that as well. I know that you're committed to the same. I did want to mention, although this is not the forum for that, and it's certainly not, it's not the Budget and Finance Committee either, and I know we've had discussions on this as well, that there is always and has been a movement at some point. I don't know what growth that ever will emerge, if at all, but certainly discussions about eliminating the only paid commission. Although I do feel it is a critical commission, whether it's paid or not is another topic for another day. And I know certainly now, during the tough economic times and what we're going through and laying off city staff, cutting back on services and programs for youth and seniors, those are things we're always going to talk about. But in terms of your appointment, I would encourage our committee to immediately pass this before Councilman Bernard Parks gets here, when he finds out that you attended UCLA. So with that, you've got my full support.
Thank you.
I think I found it quite interesting. There are 2 UCLA law grads being appointed today to this commission.
That's right. We better move quickly before he comes in the door.
Select from the best and brightest law school, right?
That's right.
So with that, we have 3 public comments. If you could just remain seated there, and we'll go through the public comments. The first is Dr. C.T. Williams.
Dr. Clyde Williams, El Sereno, also member of the LA 32 Neighborhood Council Board. Policy. Commissioners set policy. This is the second, maybe it's even larger than the Department of Water and Power. One of the questions that came up during the rate discussions for Water and Power was that some people, such as myself and others, the Department of Public Works bill is larger than the Department of Water and Power bill. But there's no transparency. We don't know, other than if you got a blue barrel, you're charged so much, no matter what. But we need to have much more transparency, and the policies of the Commission of Public Works should provide the budgets, the transparency for the numbers, and how the rates are calculated, whether they are in fact full cost recovery, whether there's additional costs, transfers, and how perhaps Proposition 26 applies to Public Works. This particular organization seems to be off the board because it doesn't have much in the way of general funds requirements. But it sets policies where we're constantly dealing with streets, sidewalks, driveways, curbs, solid waste, sewerage, stormwater, on-site wastewater treatment facilities, without knowing what's going to happen and how our rates are going to change. Prop O alone started with $500 million. Their estimates were 6 to 10% O&M for the next 100 years. Policy question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Williams. Next is Jack Comfortville.
Hi, Mitch. Welcome aboard. My name is Jack Comfortville. I'm with the Greater Wilshire Neighborhood Council. When I was coming down here today, I looked at the agenda and I saw that Mr. Choi and another lady were up for nomination. I didn't find any information about their backgrounds at all. There was no resumes. There are 2 short pages from the mayor saying these people are eminently qualified. I just listened to Mr. Choi go through his things. The Public Works is behind the 8 ball for about $10 to $20 billion of deferred maintenance. We got streets. We got sidewalks. We got street lights. We got sewers. We have the stormwater. Stormwater is $8 billion. And I didn't hear anything about the experience of Mr. Choi. Has Mr. Choi had any management experience? Big organizations with thousands of people and $1 billion worth of budgets? Is he an engineer? Has he ever filled a pothole? Has he ever driven on a truck? Does he have an engineering degree from UCLA or MIT? I don't see those qualifications. I don't see the management, the organizational, or the technical skills that I think are necessary for somebody here that's going to be screwing around with a budget of about $10 to $20 billion over the next several years. And so I therefore think he is not qualified. It appears to be just another political hack that's being nominated by the mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jack Comfortville. And just for the record, I will state my disagreement with what just was mentioned. Mr. Choi is an attorney by trade, that he has perhaps, instead of working in a corner office in some high-rise, has dedicated himself for a number of years working out in the streets, knowing what your average Angelino needs, and I think all that work makes Mr. Choi very qualified for this position. Mr. Glenn Bailey.
Good afternoon, council members. I wanted to make comments regarding both of the commissioners. I don't know either of them, so these are general comments with regards to the role that I would hope that 40% of the commission that you're considering here today will pay attention to, and you've heard a couple of those. I monitor the Board of Public Works frequently, and in my opinion, they have not done an adequate job on their oversight function of the departments that affect bicycle safety conditions in this city. A lot of what is done, works for bicycle, is done by Department of Transportation. I'm talking about items such as street services, the condition of our roadways. Obviously that is it affects motorists as well as pedestrians. But cyclists are very vulnerable to the poor conditions of many of the roadways. If you've been down Wilshire Boulevard, for example, recently, try doing a car on the outside lane, but try doing it on a bicycle. It's really a death wish. And there's many other streets as well throughout this city. And very rarely has the Board of Public Works taken the initiative to really focus in on this issue as it relates to those departments that could make them perhaps more focused and do a better job. Understand they have limited resources. But I particularly want to focus on the right hand, particularly the right side of the roadways where cyclists are riding and face these dangers. And when they swerve to avoid these dangers, that puts them at risk for oncoming vehicles. So I think we could do a better job, and I hope both commissioners are listening to me. This will be my only opportunity to speak before they get on the commission. My next time will be when they're behind that table at the commission. But I know that, the council is concerned with improving conditions, and I hope they'll ask the Board of Public Works to do so as well.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our public speakers. And Mr. Bailey, would you also like to speak for the next, you put one and two? Same comment. Okay.
Can I make?
Sure, Mr. Ingram.
I just wanted to make one comment and to address some of those concerns that were brought up. These are citizen commissions. They're appointed as such, and we've been fortunate for the most part and oftentimes to get great qualified people for these, and I wanted to respond to Mr. Humperville's comments on that as well. In fact, we've got a great commissioner sitting right behind you who's been fantastic on the Board of Public Works, Ms. Alarcon, who's done a phenomenal job and who works tirelessly throughout the city. I see her everywhere, and it's pretty incredible. I think she's cloned herself, in fact. But until such time that we actually changed that idea in the charter, and it was something that my predecessor brought that didn't make it through the council, and the idea was to start with, in fact, the DWP Commission, was to have prerequisites of each one of the seats of different qualifications, which is something that I think should be explored. But in terms of the Board of Public Works and what's before us today and dealing with the charter, I don't think, if you look at the mandates of the charter, we can find people even more qualified than who have been presented. But those are things that we should look at, and I would support the idea of changing the charter to reflect that with some of these commissions as well. And I've talked about that and will continue to. So thank you for that.
Great. Thank you very much. So with that, we'll move Mr. Choi's appointment with no objection. Mr. So ordered. Thank you. Congratulations, Mr. Choi. Do we know when this will go to council?
Yes, it's scheduled for Friday, July 22nd.
Friday, July 22nd. And for those members of the public who need more information on the individuals being appointed today, you could contact the mayor's office or the city clerk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item.
Item number 2, and that is a communication from the mayor relative to the appointment of Ms. Geraldine Lopez Mendoza to the Board of Public Works Commissioners.
Thank you. Welcome, Ms. Mendoza. We were hoping to get you through, as Mr. Englander said before Mr. Parks got here, but he's on budget and finance. He doesn't have a vote on this, but Mr. Englander said that given your UCLA law background, there might be some concern from Mr. Parks, but he doesn't have a vote on this one. But welcome, and again, another very well qualified person to sit on this commission. Can you also tell the committee and the public your background, what you hope, your qualifications for this position, and what you hope to accomplish on this commission?
I want to thank you for hearing me today. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're all very busy. Just briefly, I grew up in Montebello. I graduated from Montebello High School. I went to my undergraduate university at Stanford, where I majored in American Studies. I then worked for 3 years in 5 different nonprofit organizations, mainly related to youth and environmental issues. Then I moved down to Los Angeles, where I went to UCLA Law School, and was a resident of the city during that time for about 3 years, and then worked in private practice in litigation, doing primarily contract and real estate-based litigation for about 3 years. I then left private practice and went to work at Environmental Defense Fund here in Los Angeles in their Environmental Justice Project office, where I was a staff attorney and then a policy director. And in that position, I was particularly focused on urban environmental problems, trying to reduce pollution, trying to increase green space in the urban core. I helped to launch the Los Angeles Neighborhood Land Trust. I helped incubate the organization. As an attorney, I helped draft their nonprofit bylaws and so forth. I also worked in close collaboration with 2 different coalitions to work on community benefits agreements relating to the Staples Center expansion, as well as the expansion and modernization of Los Angeles International Airport. During that time, I also was appointed in 2005 by Mayor Villaraigosa to the Los Angeles Harbor Commission, where I was elected vice president. And during that time, I helped to work on the Clean Air Action Plan, which is the first of its kind in the world, to specifically address and reduce pollution from all different port sources, as well as the Clean Truck Program, which we launched 3 years after the Clean Air Action Plan as one of the ways to significantly reduce pollution from the port. And my skills as an environmental attorney particularly came into play as we revamped entirely how the port addressed the California Environmental Quality Act and how they drafted environmental impact reports for CEQA. And the reason that was important was because the port's previous analysis had been challenged successfully in court and was found to be deficient. And so one of the things that I worked on very hard, both in closed session and also with my fellow commissioners in open session, was trying to figure out how to come up with a very rigorous environmental review that would also allow us to move forward with modernization and expansion plans that had been stagnant for many years. And I think in that way we really broke a logjam for the port, which, as everyone knows, is not just a local resource, but is a national and economic engine and job creator. So I think in this particular instance, I would bring to the Public Works Commission both my skills and abilities in working with a variety of stakeholders. I did a lot of work with neighborhood councils and community-based organizations and environmental groups that were some of the harshest critics of the port, and I worked very closely with them, and I think built up very mutually beneficial and respectful relationships over 5 years. In addition, there was a great deal of management required at the port. As you know, it's a proprietary organization. Our budget oversight was between $300 and $400 million, including capital improvement projects. And when we arrived at the commission in 2005, Myself and my fellow commissioners found that the budget had been considered a confidential document, and one of the first things we did was decide to have open and public hearings for 2 days about the budget, so that the public would be well aware of how we were spending our money and what we were doing to reduce expenses. And we continued to do that during the 5 years that I was there. I think they still continue to do that before the budget is approved by the commission and forwarded to City Council for approval. So there were certain things like that that we did to try to make what we were doing more open and transparent. There's been huge improvements. I know this sounds like a minor thing, but it really is a big thing. The revamp of the Port's website has been incredible, and you can actually watch the Port Commission live streaming video on TV or on your computer screen, and you can find a wealth of information that wasn't the case 6 years ago. So I think in terms of what I'd like to accomplish in the Board of Public Works is, I obviously have very strong environmental beliefs. I believe very much in environmental quality, and also how environmental quality can equal economic vitality. Those two things can very much go together. I'm very aware of the budgetary issues that are affecting the department and the whole city at large, and I think I can help to be creative in how we continue to meet the needs of all Angelenos while still staying within our budgetary limits.
Great. Thank you very much. And I know that, at least for me, as you touched upon, as did the previous candidate, that for me, one of the biggest frustrations I've had is when we are not able to meet our deferred maintenance needs in the city with their streets and trees and trimming our trees and all those other needs. And I think as we move forward, both this committee and the commission need to think creatively about how we address those needs given the economic realities that we live in. So with that, any other questions or comments?
We had the opportunity to meet prior as well, and I will just say that I did appreciate that we took the time to meet, and I was not aware, and it was just somebody brought it to our attention that, and maybe this is just a practice for whatever reason, but the resumes are not included in the public package. I wasn't aware of that, and if we
I wasn't either.
we can get information on that back, because I think that was a good point that somebody made, one of the speakers had made, and I think there's good reason to do that, and perhaps with the idea of eliminating personal information in terms of home address and phone numbers and things, but I think they should be part of the public package. And with that, and then for the record though, and as somebody else had brought up to me earlier today, we don't have enough Valley commissioners and appointees as well. So if you could just state without an address where you live in the city of Los Angeles, I think that would be helpful.
I currently live in Councilmember Koretz's district in Valley Village. I've lived in Toluca Lake and NoHo as well. And if escrow closes on my first house that I'm trying to purchase with my husband, I will be in your district in North Hills, or what's strangely called West North Hills, if all goes well, on or about August 1st. So I think what that means is I'll be on the west side of the 405 in the North Hills
They
area.
set you up for that question.
That's good staff work right there.
But I actually just wanted to, if I have both of you here, I also just wanted to quickly address, if you can Google me, and I'm on LinkedIn, and so actually a public version of my resume is on LinkedIn that I know you can get to the public. I know it's also on the website of my current organization, which is ICLEI USA, ICLEI USA, and there's a biography there that includes my educational background.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. I think some folks will do that. And then we'll try to do that with John Choi as well, and make sure we Google him. Okay, fantastic.
Thank you. And no, that's a good point. I find that sometimes council offices do have to request additional information from the mayor's office, but that's a discussion we need to have with the mayor's office as to how can some of this information be out there without violating people's privacy. And I'm not quite sure how that could be done, but it's an issue we need to bring up with the mayor's office. Thank you. Any... I'd like to we move this item. Any objections? No objections. Congratulations. I look forward to seeing you on council again when?
Also on Friday, July 22nd.
Friday, July 22nd.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we do have a public speaker. Dr. Williams, apologize for that. If you could stay up there, I'm sorry.
Something about transparency. Dr. Clyde Williams, El Sereno, Northeast LA. Pretty much the same as before. Transparency. I participate in the Board of Public Works meetings many times. Transparency. In this day and age of digital accessibility, not to have resumes immediately available, linked, is really not acceptable. Continuing references to field reports, references to reports within the agenda items, no linkage. So there's a question as to transparency. I hear a lot, but will I see anything? Then, again, the rates. The rates for solid waste, for sewerage, exceed my water and power bills. So, where's the budget? Where's the rates? What rates can we foresee during the next 3 to 5 years? All of these things need to be compared because right now people are starting to recognize that rate increases and greening the services is a real problem. And it's going to cost us money to deal with stormwater. It's going to cost us money to deal with water supply. And we have a lot of, quotes, mandates in the system, and we're going to have to pay, but we don't know how much we're going to have to pay. Board of Public Works approved a program for 2020 of $7 or $8 billion for stormwater. The $500 million for Prop O is just a beginning. 5 to 7% O&M every year. That becomes a very large amount of money, which will have to come from policies setting new rates during the next few years. I hope we get those transparent rates and budgets. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Congratulations again. Did you put in a card also for number 2? Okay. It only said 1, but you want to speak on number 2 as well, Mr. Jack Comfortville.
My name is Jack Humphrey. I'm with the Greater Wilshire Neighborhood Council. I'll reiterate my comments about the organizational skills, management experience, and engineering. However, I'd also like to thank you very much for your very thorough, detailed of your history and your education and all those things. So that was very helpful. Thank you very much. I guess my only complaint on this one is that she worked for the Port, and the Port is being advertising for the Dodgers these days, and anybody that sports Frank McCourt really needs to be reconsidered. Thank you.
That concludes the Public Works Committee. We will
Home run on that one, Jack.
We will now open up the joint Budget and Finance and Public Works Committee. We're being joined again on the Public Works side by Mr. Englander and myself as the chair of Budget and Finance. Mr. Parks is here, and I believe that both Mr. Rosenthal and Mr. Koretz are outside. Will be joining us shortly. This items on today's agenda are item 3, 4, and 5. Items 3 and 4 deal with sidewalks and the need to address the issue of cracked, broken, however you want to call it, sidewalks in our city, and the huge need to address sidewalks throughout our city. Item number 5 is a report about our street furniture fund to the joint committees. And if we could start off with items 3 and 4 and have the departments, I'm not quite sure how you would want to present this, or if it's the Public Works Commissioners or the department who will present on this item. And as many of you know, the background on this item is that state law makes it the responsibility of property owners, adjacent property owners, that they are liable for repairing sidewalks. In the 1970s, as I've been told, and I'm sure the departments will let us all know, that burden shift did to the city for damage caused by trees because of available money from the federal government. However, after 3 years, that money dried up, but we never went back to change the law, to change our own municipal code to say that that responsibility falls back now with the adjacent property owners. The result has been is that we have many miles, I'm not quite sure how many miles, but about 4,000 miles of sidewalks that need repair. That not only means a lot in terms of money, but certainly affects the quality of life for many residents who do see these sidewalks that have not been repaired. There was a bond that was proposed in 1998 for $780 million. It only got 43% of support. And since we stopped using federal money to support sidewalks, we've been asking our general fund to make repairs, asphalt repairs, to those sidewalks that may pose legal liability to the city. So it's not a pretty situation that we are in, but we need to address this full on. It was the intent of this committee, Public Works Committee, to address it in this fiscal year, and through the Budget and Finance Committee deliberations, it was suggested that both of these committees take on this issue, and that's what brings us here today. That's a quick synopsis. I'll leave it up to our department heads now to brief us on this item and any reports you may have given us today.
Good afternoon, council members. Nazario Sauceda, Interim Director, Bureau of Street Services. First and foremost, I want to apologize because for this meeting, we wanted to provide a final report. However, as you can read on the top of the report that I just provided to you, this is just a final draft because we're still validating some of the statistical information that we provided there. Within the next couple of days, I should be able to submit to your honorable committees a final report. The report that you have in your hands right now basically makes reference to the last meeting.
I'm sorry, sorry to interrupt you. Mr. Parks, as the Chair of Budget and Finance, do you want to add anything before we begin?
Oh, no, I think just want to acknowledge that we have all of our full committees here, and we're prepared to listen to the reports.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, the report basically makes reference, number one, to the last meeting held on April 8th of 2010. And at that time, your honorable committees asked the Bureau of Street Services, instructed the Bureau of Street Services and the city attorney to proceed with the ordinance amendment of the LAMC to repeal the exception that established city liability to repair curbs, driveways, and sidewalks due to tree root damage. Most recently, the city attorney, and of course he's here, the city attorney introduced that proposed amendment. And in addition to that, the draft report that I made available to you, council members, also includes a menu of options for your consideration that address primarily how can we solve the sidewalk repair challenge that we have in front of you. As you know very well, and you mentioned it, Councilmember Weiser, we have approximately 4,600 miles of sidewalk that require repair. And we made, in this report, we made available to you 10 possible options for your consideration. Our recommendation to you is that to please see him and give us some guidance. Let us know in particular which ones do you consider feasible, and then give the Bureau of Street Services 120 days to come back with a detailed report as to, what are the funding requirements, the staffing needs, et cetera, et cetera. We know very well the demographics throughout the city change significantly between council district and council district, and we know very well that no one knows your constituency better than you. So for the same reason, we're asking for your guidance, and more than anything, again, give us your take as to which one of the options that we presented, in your opinion, are the most feasible, and then give us 120 days to come back with a detailed plan.
Okay. Well, why don't we do this? Can you briefly walk us through the, how many, whatever number of options you have here? I think 10 options
Yes.
as to how you suggest we may go about in addressing this issue. Let's go over those briefly, and some of these are a few sentences, one paragraph. I would imagine for some of these we may need additional information, but
Just a point of clarification. Are you talking about going over the options on the final draft that was just submitted?
That is correct, council member.
Can I just ask a question of the city attorney before we do that?
sure.
Since this is a final draft that wasn't actually in the package and wasn't submitted or agendized to go over, can we do that? They're reporting on it,
The subject matter can be discussed.
but the report actually,
They can go through the subject matter and describe it as it's related to the agendized item.
Mr. Chairman, I think the subject matter is a continuation of discussions prior in the committee. It's a broad, I think the agenda is broad enough to incorporate discussion of not only what has been presented in the past, but also some of the new ideas that they are bringing to the table today. And then if you want, you can continue the matter for additional report backs and discussion.
okay, so for discussion, just for clarification, for legalities, for discussion purposes only, then we could hear the report. We can't then make any decision based on the report is what I'm hearing.
Correct. Unless, is there a city attorney available?
Yes, I agree. I mean, you can be discussing the contents of this report. You can be asking them to come back and report back to you further. I believe there was some statistical data that was the only thing remaining to be finalized. And I expect we'll be asking them to report back further as to specific options. Moreover, this report is the continuation of a long line of reports, and these options really have already, much of which have already been discussed in prior reports to this committee, which are already out there in terms of the record of this committee.
Great, thank you. And to be clear, what's before us today is item number 3, which asks the street services and the city attorney to report on a draft ordinance relative to amending the Los Angeles Municipal Code in connection with a point-of-sale plan for sidewalk repair and related matters. Also is item number 4, which is asking street services and the city attorney to report on the draft ordinance relative to amending the code, subsection E, to repeal the exception that established city liability for repairs of curbs, driveways, and sidewalks due to tree root damage. Those are the 2 items that we're discussing, but under that purview, I imagine that the street services could come up and say, if you delete that exception, these are the options of how you could address it. So I believe that we could discuss it, number 1. And second, at any time, any member of this committee could make a motion for direction if it receives full votes. Anybody could make a motion to adopt the report, which I hope we don't, because I'm looking at this and I think we need a whole lot more information.
Mm-hmm.
But nonetheless, any committee member has, it's up to their discretion if they'd like to move an item that falls under that agenda item. So just want to make that clear.
Yes, and also before you is the ordinance that we submitted. It's a City Attorney Report R110132 dated March 31st, which is the ordinance to repeal the exception on the tree root damage.
Thank you. And for the record, we've been joined by Mr. Alacorn, who is a member of the Public Works Committee. So with that, why don't we, any other questions and comments by committee members before we move on and go over each one of these options? Mr. Parks? Would you like to go through the different options, please?
Yes.
Are there copies of this for the public? Did you bring sufficient copies? Okay. Somebody will run down and get some copies, and I choose my staff. Over here, somebody will run down and make a few copies of the report for the public and put them on that table. Thank you. Please, go ahead.
Yeah, once the repeal of the exception is adopted, once again, we have 10 different options that we're making available for your consideration. Primarily is, number 1 is explicit enforcement. Bureau investigators would go to different locations and inspect the sidewalk condition throughout the city and provide city residents with a notice to effect the required repairs. Second option, of course, is point of service, what we call point of service or sale, and building permits. Point of service would require the buyer or of a property to obtain a safe sidewalk certificate from the Bureau of Street Services, very similar to the case of point of sale. But in this case, we're talking about point of service and building permits. That would basically ask residents of the city of Los Angeles that when they perform home improvements for over $20,000, they would have to perform sidewalk repair as well. Number 3 is explicit enforcement in commercial zones. Knowing that the majority of the pedestrian activity happens in commercial zones, enforcement would be focused entirely on those particular areas of the city, of the right-of-way. The next option, of course, is point of service with a voluntary 50-50 repair program. Obviously, the city would have to determine or assign a certain level of funding to allow property owners to perform the repairs in a similar way that we had the 50-50 program for 4 years before. The city pays 50% and the property owners will pay the other 50%. The next option is compliance or enforcement based only on liability risks, basically asking property owners where a claim transpired to fix or repair that particular sidewalk. It would be only based on liability and claims. The next one is explicit enforcement only on major corridors. This is obviously in our estimation, and again, this is where we need to validate our statistical information. 25% of the street network is comprised, of course, of major and secondary highways, and the majority of the risk and the liability transpire at those particular locations. The next case is enforcing the ordinance at locations where we had trip and fall situations, whether there was a claim or not. The mere fact that there was a trip and fall situation called for our attention. So we are making the recommendation that it doesn't have to go to the level of a claim or liability for us to enforce those particular locations. Sidewalk repair assessment district is one of the other options. Obviously, we can consider, we need to come up with a plan to assess the entire city, assess neighborhoods, assess certain areas, and of course, this will require the participation of several city departments, including BOE, Department of Planning, Bureau of Street Services. But creating assessment districts, it's another of the options that we are making available to you. And lastly, of course, is not doing anything at this time. Just, waiting for things to happen. Maybe the economy will turn back again, and we'll have money to do more sidewalk repairs. So at this point, these are the 10 options that we are making available to you.
Okay, and one of the options that you did not list, we've tried going out for bonds before, but
Oh, yes.
that is also another option, correct?
Yes, we can add that to the report, to the final report, by all means.
Sure, Mr. Lecklin?
On the explicit enforcement
Right, yes.
issue, now, the idea there is that we require the adjoining property owners to be responsible for their sidewalk repairs. Would there be any exemption for properties who have been trying to get the city to fix it for like 180 years and they never fixed it? It would seem to be illegal or just patently wrong for us to require a property owner to fix it when we didn't fix it, and notwithstanding the fact that the property owner was asking us to fix it for years and years and years.
You want to answer?
Well, I think it would be legal. You raise a question as to whether it would be right or wrong, and that's a policy decision that the policymakers would need to make. But from a legal standpoint, that's what the ordinance that we're proposing.
Now, even though the property owner didn't ask to put a particular tree in, the city can just force them to fix a sidewalk that was damaged by that tree?
Consistent with state law.
Pardon me?
Consistent with state law, yes. In fact, that was the state of affairs prior to.
Do me a favor. Can you speak right into the mic, because I can.
That would be consistent with state law, and that was the state of the city's law prior to the amendment change in around 1972, 74, where the exception was put in place. The general rule under state law is that the property owner is responsible for maintaining the sidewalk.
I have no problem with
no, I understand.
the general rule.
Yes.
It's just the specifics where we required that certain trees be put in, and then now we're going to say that even though those trees are causing damage, you're responsible for it.
From a legal standpoint, that is something that the city could choose to do. I don't know for a fact in the cases when the street trees are there, when do we require specific trees, when do we not, when do we sign off on a tree decision, but that's a different issue.
Given that issue, because I do believe that it would be wrong to take that approach solely, but I would recognize that moving forward, if somebody put a tree in, then it cracks the sidewalk, then they should be responsible for it. But retroactively, I think it would be the wrong policy for us to implement that kind of report.
And I think what Mr. Alarcon is asking is legally, from basic tort law, if the city causes the damage and we're asking somebody else to pay for that damage, I mean, legally, that's still okay.
Well,
Can somebody come back and sue the city and say, wait a minute, I'm taking the city to court on, tort, because they caused this and now or it's property, but, cause and effect, I mean, for damages, who is responsible here?
Well, it's the tree that, we're assuming that this is damage caused by tree roots. It's the tree that's causing it. I would argue that it's not the city that's causing that damage. If we go up and jackhammer a sidewalk, that would be one thing, but that's not the situation.
Okay. Mr. Englund?
Yeah, I've just got a few questions on this, and it seems to me that I don't know how we are flip-flopping about liability when this should be a city responsibility, and from everything I've seen, always has been. I got a few questions on on all the city-owned property, our parks, libraries, DWP, the police and fire stations. Do we know how many miles of sidewalks are in need of repair in front of all of our own property?
Not in particular in front of city facilities, but certainly that's information that we can get.
Well, I think it's important to know that also going into this conversation, because if we can't take care of yet our own property, how do we expect and set by an example, at least at a minimum, and how do we push liability on everybody else? So I've got that as a question. Also, I think it's disproportionate. There are a lot of citywide, there are a lot of property owners, seniors, not only just the elderly, but those who can barely afford, particularly in this economy, to make their mortgage or rent payments, that are out of work. We're looking at one of the worst economic times, and certainly in my lifetime. How we can put this on property owners that if they have to suddenly, and looking at your new proposals here, replace a roof at $20,000 and just to be able to keep the lights on, make some critical improvements, all of a sudden they get hit with a bill of thousands of dollars that they have to repair within 90 days. And it looks like if these things are married, it could be interpreted as such that not only would they have to do that within 90 days, but if they had their utilities bills, if they had their utility disconnected during those repairs, they couldn't even turn their electricity back on without fixing the sidewalk, according to the way that this is written. And so I've had some grave concern about that, and I think it's also a Prop 218 issue on that. With that, I think a lot of this, there's other ways to go about doing it. If there are 10 proposals here, and I think the very first thing that I heard our chairman suggest that wasn't even part of the proposals was taking it perhaps to a citywide bond and see if the voters were interested in supporting this. But I think pushing this back to the homeowners causes all kinds of problems. We've got ADA lawsuits right now as well. And these aren't just homeowners, property owners, commercial property owners, and the like, that those are unresolved. So I think there's some questions that we'd have to go into closed session on. Do we continue to assume those liabilities even if we gave this liability back to homeowners after all these years? Some of the other questions are, we stopped getting federal funds, you said a minute ago, in 1976. Under this new wave of federal funds from ARA funds, from shovel-ready projects, and I would think sidewalks are shovel-ready projects for the most part, would qualify. Have we applied for any federal dollars for repair since 1976?
The money that we received from the federal government was primarily for the utilization of, or for the resurfacing of streets and other projects, such as construction and beautification projects, not primarily for the sidewalk repair.
So no, I guess my question is, have we actually applied for any federal funds to fix sidewalks since 1976?
Not to the best of my knowledge, no.
So I would suggest that be item 1 on 1 through 10 first, since there are funds for major infrastructure. It would put people back to work. These are shovel-ready projects that we can look at federal programs. I think we just, the city of Los Angeles just elected a new member of Congress that was sworn in this week. There was a council member who understands public works. We can certainly talk to her again. And I think she understands local issues, and maybe she'll have an open ear to that. But I would think we haven't exhausted all of our resources, and I would agree with Mr. Alarcon that there are several issues on this front as well.
Okay.
Thank you. So we have bonds as another option, and federal funds, applying for additional federal funds. That's another option as well. Mr. Parks, and then I'll have him call upon your...
Yeah, if I could, I had the privilege when I first joined the City Council to be chair of Public Works. And then Bill Robertson said to me, it would take 83 years to fix our sidewalks, okay? And then we talked about several bond measures that could be floated over a period of time to fix the sidewalks. That went by the boards as the economic crisis in the nation continued to fester, okay? We do know of some money right now, and it's the Safe Routes program for schools. And that Safe Routes program for school has money to repair sidewalks going to schools or around schools. If DOT is not in the room here, I would like them to look at that Safe Routes program, see what kind of funds there are there for sidewalk repair, and see if that could help us with the situation. But I'll be very candid with everybody at this point. Under this situation today, I am for option 10, which is to do nothing at this point. I think it's an undue burden on a homeowner at this point to ask them to pick up a tab. There is such a question about where the trees come from to begin with in front of people's homes, who planted them and what kind of trees. Obviously, we do have problems with our sidewalks. For instance, I have a tremendous problem with Sepulveda Boulevard and sidewalks. I mean, the sidewalks go up like this. But we were fortunate to get $1 million from Maxine Waters, and we're in the process of negotiating with Howard Hughes, which is building an additional complex for substantially more money to assist us in that particular set of sidewalks. So we have to be creative, and we have to think out of the box when it comes to sidewalks. But I cannot support putting the burden on the homeowner at this point, and I would not want to go out and say you have to come up with this in 90 days or 120 days. It's hard enough for people to make their mortgage payments, keep their kids in school, than to have to take that on. My biggest concern, of course, is the liability issue. I sit on budget, we sit in closed session, a person trips, and then they sue. They sue the homeowner, and they sue the city. And we're in no position to pay these kinds of lawsuits, and we're also not in the position today to repair the sidewalk. And I think most homeowners are in the same position. So I was pushing for the bond measures, which didn't go anywhere. Then we were looking at point of sale. Well, if you're going to sell your property, you got to put some money aside to repair your sidewalk as part of the package of your house. Now, that's become extremely threatened under the economic conditions we're in. Look at the foreclosures we have. Look at people whose value in their property has gone way down. So timing is everything. What I'd like to do, frankly, is send this back for more revisions, look at other federal monies that there might be available. I think Mr. Englander's point about potential shovel-ready strategies could also help. But I don't want to put the burden, first of all, on the city going out and checking things when you don't even have staff to do that. And secondly, I certainly don't want those people whose sidewalks are the homeowners to be burdened right now in the worst of economic times for most of us. But thank you so much for your report.
Mr. Koretz?
Yeah, I think I heard this mentioned in passing, but I'm not sure I really heard an answer. What do we do with people who are low income or who don't have the financing to move ahead with this? Do we foreclose on their homes if they're not able to pay for their sidewalks? I don't think I really heard an answer in terms of a plan for people that really can't afford to pay for this.
Actually, council member, and that's an excellent point. On the last page, you will see that we're asking also for your guidance and your opinion. We have some policy questions that arose as a result of having interactions with the different offices, and one of them is precisely what you just mentioned, council member. What is the city position regarding property owners unable to pay for sidewalk improvements? Should the city have a level of funding available to them, like a 50-50? That is precisely one of the concerns that we have, and that's why we're here today to give us some guidance as to what would be the city policy to address those particular property owners who do not have the money to perform the work.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how we fund that. Also, I know we're doing this partly because of our own problems with financing and staffing. How many more staff would be needed to check the plans for all of these sidewalks, and what would the process be to, what would the steps be that would involve the city before people actually could go ahead and repair the sidewalk?
Well, in terms of sidewalk repair, if we were to use the old module that we had when we had a sidewalk program, we required 45 employees to complete 26 miles of sidewalk repair within 1 year. And again, that's only for a module of 26 miles, 46 people. Now, if we want to do more than 46 miles, obviously everything will be proportional to the number of miles that we want to complete per year.
So if we actually notified everyone that they needed to do this within 90 days, which I think was one of the proposals, how many staff people would we need to check that for an entire city?
That is why, again, we're making available different options. You may not want to, let's say, and I'm going to pick on one of the options randomly, you may not want to enforce the ordinance, let's say, on residential areas. Therefore, automatically you eliminate 3/4 of the sidewalk length or the sidewalk issue, in the city of LA, because you are not going to enforce it in residential areas. You will concentrate only on commercial or industrial areas where, the amount of miles is significantly lower than the miles in residential areas.
Yeah, I don't know. All of these options seem pretty screwy to me, frankly. When we did have a program, we did it so slowly that it was estimated that it would take almost 90 years to fix the problem.
Yes.
So I would say in this economy, if we just stopped fixing sidewalks other than emergencies for a few years, didn't pass it on to private homeowners and business owners, and then once our economy was in better shape, we revisited establishing the program again, I think that would frankly make the most sense. And that would be the direction I'd prefer to go in.
That I agree with, because we had the 50-50 program in CD11. You put up 50 cents, the city puts up 50 cents, and it worked, because certain people had the affluence to put up 50%. But of course, that program went by the boards when we ran out of money to do that. That would be one where we're incented, but not fined or threatened to be fined. And if we could bring the 50-50 back and find those kinds of resources, it was very effective in my district.
Mr. Parks, and then Mr. Englander.
Let me give a opposing view. I don't think we have a real option in this situation other than fix the sidewalks. And this issue is the city has spent $100 million over a very short period of time to fix 500 miles of sidewalk, and the sidewalks are in worse shape than they were when we got started. So we can sit here and talk about not putting the burden on the public, but we certainly can't fix them with the city's finances, and will not be able to fix them in the city's finances in the near or distant future. So we can basically kick the can as we've done it since 1976, and we can say to the public, we don't care about your neighborhoods, just have screwed up sidewalks. That's what we can tell them, because that's what you do when you kick the can. And then what we do is that we then go to the court and we pay over $3 million a year because someone didn't kick the can, they fell over the sidewalk. So if we say do nothing, then we should just be prepared to keep paying for the liability. And it's great to have statements to say the public can't afford it. We can't afford it either, and we're in worse shape than the public. I mean, so I don't know who we're fooling by saying we can't afford to give this to the community. Community, if you lived in the city of Los Angeles before '72, we had a great sidewalk program. They sent you a notice and said, fix your sidewalk. And you fixed it, and you never thought about calling the city and saying, can I fix my sidewalk? You were required. When you had a tree in front of your house, you were required to take care of that tree. No one disputed that before '73. The bad part of this program is when the city made that 2-year issue of getting cash flow money. And that money, if it were today, we would say it's one-time money on a multi-year expense. We would find it out of the policy of the city to take 2 years of money and then sacrifice with these trees. The problem I think we've run into is that not only have we seen in the Budget Committee that we've taken responsibility for trees and sidewalks, we've taken responsibility for all sidewalks. We're paying liability on sidewalks where there are no trees. And we're going to court and accepting it, and we have yet to go to a owner of the property and say, you owe us for this. It wasn't until recently that I had a conversation with the city attorney to advise them and said, why are we going to court and defending sidewalks not broken by trees? Because sidewalks not broken by trees have been the owner's responsibility since 1911. That's a little history, 1911. And up until '70, not one person showed up and said, city, fix my sidewalk. They never disputed about the trees. We confused the public by, number one, having 2 years of money and saying we're going to do this, and then continuing it when we knew there was no hope of fixing the sidewalk. Anything that we have in the city that takes 83 years timeline, we should give it to somebody that can do it. And the people that have the responsibility and the understanding and the need to do it are those that live in front of the sidewalks. We can all leave this room today and say, well, my sidewalk is fixed. The problem is the other several million people that call us, and the 90-year-old woman that says, when are you going to fix my sidewalk? The answer is, we're never going to fix your sidewalk. That's the answer. I mean, anybody that says anything different is blowing smoke. We couldn't even afford the 50-50 program. So what are we going to do? Say, then we should just change it and say we're going to do nothing, and we should change it and say to people, we're never going to fix your sidewalk, don't call again. Because that's what we're saying. And so the only way you're going to get the sidewalks fixed, and there's just a little money in council offices that can aid people, and that's just subsidy money, but that's not enough to fix, in many instances, a sidewalk. And so, again, we can keep kicking the can, we can keep looking at it another way, we can keep making statements so that people can pick up and say, I'm supporting of the public, and I don't want a 90-year-old woman to have a sidewalk fixed. I don't want a 90-year-old woman to fall over the sidewalk that she can't get out of her house. And so the key is that, again, if we're going to go that route, then we just say, when the next time someone calls, says, no, we're not going to fix your sidewalk, don't call back. It's not a job. We have no money. And I can tell you today, tomorrow, and the next day, we will not have money for sidewalks for weeks, months, and decades to come. And we can talk about federal money. We can talk about going to other sources. We haven't found those sources since 1976. 1976, we've not found those sources. So anybody that thinks there's hidden money out there, a pot of gold, you're whistling Dixie. And so the issue is that we either going to confront the issue of sidewalks and talk about 60-some hundred miles of sidewalks. We're going to either fix them in a certain fashion. What was the overall city response on bonds last time? An overwhelming 40%. Yeah, we could go to the bank on that one. I mean, so what did we do? Go to another bond and say maybe we'll get 42? I mean, so I just think we're just putting ourselves in a bind. And again, if you're just willing to pay $3 million plus a year, realize that the sidewalks and the trees, the sidewalks are what do we call them? We will never lose total control of them because we have to give people the right of way to get through there. But they're not ours. Every sidewalk that has been built in this city just about has been put in by the developer that built the track. The trees, most of them have been put in by the developer that built the track, and then the city either allowed people to cut them down and added new trees. Unfortunately, the city put the wrong trees in for the first 20 or 30 years. So again, we can, keep scheduling this and staring at each other, except that it's not going to be working. And again, if we're going to take the tack that we're hearing, then let's just tell people we don't fix trees and sidewalks and don't call again, and we can move on to something else. But I just think it's something that we have no choice. When you think about the two major lawsuits that are going, that one thing that we should do today is make sure we take that 1970 clause out of the current ordinance, or all we're doing is asking for more liability, even if we don't fix another sidewalk. And then as we hear about sidewalks, I think what we've looked at, the only way to protect the city's purse is to start notifying people that their sidewalks are broken. At least you're going to share the liability with them. And the only way I think the city continues to survive is to use, and nobody likes it, but to use the asphalt as part of the temporary fix. So you at least say you've done something, because otherwise constructive notification will kill us all. And so we can, like I said, we can ignore it. We can say do nothing. But again, then we should just change all of our stuff and say, we're not going to fix sidewalks. Don't call again. Let's work on something else. I just think we're kicking a can that's been kicked since 70.
Mr. Englander?
I think those were some very good arguments. I wasn't around in 1911, so I couldn't address that. In 1976, I think I was 6 years old. I'm looking at the economy now and where we're at. I don't know if this is a question of responsibility, liability, moral character, who we're here to represent, a financial discussion. I mean, there's a lot of things out there on the table on this. And this issue, to me, is that we do represent the people. We are the people. It's not an us versus them. We were put here and voted for by the people that we represent. And with that, I think we have a responsibility. And it's not a financial issue, it's a responsibility. We can't afford it right now. And that goes back to the discussion of priority-based budget and what we should be funding as the City of Los Angeles, what our core functions are. What the very thing we should be doing is local government, fixing our streets, fixing our sidewalks, trimming our trees, painting out graffiti, making sure we have police and firefighters, making sure we have a safe city, making sure we're fully staffed for our planning department and the core functions of the city. And I don't think we've done a great job at doing that historically either. But simply changing the liability because we can't afford it anymore, I think opens up Pandora's box to what else should we put off. If we can't afford to hire firefighters at some point in time in the future, if things get worse, will at some point we suggest that homeowners take matters into their own hands, that they're responsible for putting out their own fires if their house or the commercial property catches on fire? I think they pay enough in the taxes to address that issue. The concern that I have also right now on things like point of sale, this is the worst economic climate that we've seen in our history. they are anticipating 2011 to be the worst real estate market that we've ever seen. With that, there's a lot of people that are just buying their first home, that are trying to get into a home. It's very difficult to get financing with lenders now. If you're getting a HUD loan, it's very difficult to get approved at just 3% down. What would happen then if you couldn't close escrow to get one of these properties, and you can barely afford, and your house poor, you can barely afford to get in at that point? What kind of ripple effect is that going to have? The other part of that is that if this really slows down the real estate market any more than, and I don't know how it could be slowed down further. Right now it's on life support. But if it did, we've got to go back to the analogy of not kicking the can down the road, but biting the hand that feeds us. Because we rely on those transactions. We rely on movements in the marketplace. We rely on commercial properties and retailers to do well and prevail. If they have to spend their money on fixing sidewalks, which should have been and should be the core responsibility of local government of the city of Los Angeles, then they're going to have to lay off employees. They're not going to be able to buy those homes. Escrows are going to be tied up, and it's going to cause further economic hardship to the city of Los Angeles, and create other unnecessary, unwarranted consequences that are unanticipated. So I think we've got to go back to the drawing board and look at the fact that if this is a financial question, it really goes back to what is the priority of the city of LA, what's our priorities-based budget, what are the things we should be funding first, things like this to maintain our communities and our properties, not an issue of simply shifting liability back to some antiquated or archaic law that was first passed in 1911. The world has changed. Thank you.
Thank you. What I'll do at this time is open up the public comment period, and then we'll come back to the committee members for some final thoughts and direction as to where we go from here. And let me say, before we go on, I do hope through this process to come up with some solution, whether it's a do-nothing solution, which is always an option, or but I think we're at the point in this process to get more information, and we'll ask for more information. We'll ask for some report backs, but hopefully in September we'll be able to come back in another joint meeting with those responses. And I know you asked for more time in the departments, but we need to come up with something soon, whether we're going to move on this or not. But we're going to ask for some more information, come back at the end of September, and see where we go from there after we get that additional information. That's what I'm hoping to do if my colleagues agree with that direction after this. But we'll ask for some report backs, some more questions, and possibly narrow down your area of research before you come back. And I'm going to ask that the CLA and the CAO enlist in this. So far it's been department driven, but we do need the CAO and CLA to help start helping out with some of this information we may be asking for. So with that, let me go to public comment. You could stay up there if you'd like, and maybe the people come up to either the two ends of the table. The first speaker is Dr. Williams.
Dr. Clyde Williams, El Sereno. I don't mind if you require the homeowners to repair. I have no sidewalks either side of the street, so no problem. Liabilities, no problem. The problem comes as to how good can we do this? Take, for example, lot cleaning and brush clearance. Same problems. They don't allow 90 days, and it goes on as a lien on your property. If you do not do the work yourself, somebody else does it, boom, it's on your tax roll. So you have a process already in place, either lot cleaning or brush clearance, that has it, if you know what you're going to do. What becomes a liability? We had a situation in El Sereno. We were talking about kids sliding into home plate. Well, we had one child break her leg while sliding into home plate. Guess what? We got the home plate resurfaced. So how far do we have to wait? By the way, this is the Department of Public Works. The Board of Public Works governs them. The policies. Where are the policies? that have been established by the department's board. You were talking about other city properties. How about all the CRA properties? How about recreation and parks? Because Guardia Park in El Sereno has a problem with its roots. Oh, there's also an unintended consequence. If I was a property owner with a big tree and between the curb and the sidewalk, guess what I would do? I would cut it down, or I'd ring bark it, or I'd kill the tree so that it would not destroy the sidewalk, and call for the city to come and remove their tree. Thank you.
Mr. Alarcon, then we'll go back to public
Yes.
comment.
First of all, let me say that I don't think this is bad staff work. I think it's good staff work. Giving us as many options as you could come up with, I have no problem with that.
I'm sorry, Rich, I can't hear you.
Yeah, you're right. I should pull this. I don't have a problem with these recommendations. They're not recommendations; they're actually options. So we're not gonna. I'm not gonna have a problem with the messenger. These are ideas. I think you did a good job. There's some that I'd like to just eliminate off the top, but I think there's some that we can fully explore. And for example, the developing assessment districts. If we can do it for streetlights, we can do it for curbs and gutters, and I think we should. Mr. Parks makes some very valid points, although I don't know that it's politically feasible. And the other thing is that back in the early 70s, when I was in high school, the proportion of homeowners in the city of Los Angeles was probably more than 50%. Today it's 35%. So there's a different dynamic going on, and so maybe we want to just impose this on people who rent their properties, but then they would increase the rents. So I mean, it's a policy consideration at the end of the day. Those of us that have CRA programs, and I certainly have a sidewalk repair program as part of my CRA. We can bolster those programs and combine them with the sidewalk assessment districts. One thing I did want to say, though, the city's sidewalks are very expensive. And did the department do any analysis of finding a cheaper model? And why do we have to have a one-size-fits-all? Why can't we encourage communities to do something that might look in more conformance with their houses? There was one such project on Stonehurst in Shadow Hills, where they essentially built a decomposed granite sidewalk with wooden posts, and it fits the equestrian community, and it looks better than a sidewalk would. Certainly to them it looks better, and so the question is, how much can we save? Like, to do, what did you say, 500 miles with how much money? Or the other, 500 million to do 200 miles?
No, just under 100 million to do 500 miles.
Okay, 100 million to do 500 miles. The question is, can we do 1,000 miles with that same amount if we change the standards and give the community options to consider more reasonable ways to do it? Have we explored those concepts?
But Richard, let me just say one thing. One of the reasons is that the sidewalk, once you fix it, lasts something like 80 years. So you go into a lesser standard, then you're fixing it more, but 80 years of service as long as you put the right tree in the tree room.
Certainly, we have...
Right now, I just want to get to 10 years from now. The problem is we have more sidewalks falling apart, and at least if the cost to a homeowner to do a project that would last for 10 years is feasible. The cost to do it for 80 years is infeasible. I'd rather get the next 10 years done, and maybe the next owner, since home ownership transfers on average every 2.5 years, why not put it on the next owner to do the next 10 years and the next 10 years and the next 10 years? I'm just saying that I think we could do it cheaper and still maintain standards, and in fact, many neighborhoods will do it in a way that looks better.
Yes, we have contemplated several numerous options, including, for example, using recycled material. As part of the, when we had the sidewalk program in the 50/50, all the crushed material that we were obtaining as a result of removing the old sidewalk was being reutilized, and therefore we were saving a lot of money and making the price per mile, the cost per mile, better than using virgin aggregate. The other option that we tried before is that as a result of our resurfacing operations, we have a lot of grindings. You know, all this grinding, this asphalt, the chunks of asphalt that we have, we crush them, and then we could use, you know, that material to be applied on the sidewalk area. If you properly compact it, you get a solid, level surface. However, the durability is not there. I mean, we're talking only a few years, you know, and then the other thing too is that the majority of the residents don't want to see anything else besides the white concrete on their sidewalks. It is very hard even when we bring rubberized asphalt to neighborhoods, they don't want it. Even if, you know, the quality is there and the appearance is nice, I think there's always that old stigma.
That's when we paid for it.
Yes.
That's when we paid for it.
Mm-hmm.
If you ask them to pay for it, I think they'll like it.
Yeah. True.
It's very simple. David Emptor. I think they'll like it a lot better, particularly if they're not planning on staying there for 50 years.
Yes, but certainly we can try different avenues to make sure that the cost per mile is reduced, you know, in a way that it will allow us to do more for the same dollar.
Well, when we get the next report back, can you include some of those?
Yes, we will.
Ideas?
By all means.
I'm writing those down so we could ask at the end of the meeting. Barry Weiss. Barry Weiss. After Barry Weiss is Glenn Bailey.
Honorable Councilman, my name is Barry Weiss. I live in Studio City. I'm representing the Studio City Residents Association as well as the Studio City Neighborhood Council. I'm also representing myself. Once upon a time in the city of Los Angeles, property values were on the rise with no end in sight, providing reserve equity for homeowners to pay for college, unexpected medical expenses, gaps in employment, and new business adventures and their retirement. For the most recent housing bubble, as a backdrop, policy experts with studies in hand, lobbyists for the construction industry, city public works managers, and trade unions representing public employees and construction labor convinced lawmakers that a point-of-sale tax was the best way to pay for badly needed sidewalk repairs. They dressed it up with faulty assumptions and argued that the city should take a piece of the pie, a new tax, when homeowners cashed in on their equity fortunes to use for sidewalks. Sounds great. That is, if all remain constant. Unfortunately, the housing bubble burst, and it burst big, with no end in sight. Economic recovery is more hope than reality. The American dream of homeownership has become a nightmare as property values continue to decline, with as much as 60% of values in Los Angeles lost. A new tax for anything during a recession, especially for sidewalk repairs, when more essential government projects and services, especially those for children, the needy, and the elderly, have been cut or curtailed, is irresponsible and oppressive. The once promising point-of-sale tax for sidewalk repairs was based on the assumptions that no longer hold weight. Specifically, and I can get to these later in my next presentation, the liability to the city still remains whether you give it to the property owner or not.
Glenn Bailey. If Dennis Hathaway is next, if you could come up to the other seat.
Are we doing just 3 or 3 and 4 at this
We're
point?
doing 3 right now, and then I'll get to the you're on 3 and 4?
Right. 'Cause I'm presenting something from my neighborhood council, but I need to wait for the other one to do it. So let me do comments on 3 then, if I may.
I got you.
And then I'll present the other one when you get to that. My name is Glenn Bailey, speaking as an individual at this segment. In previous department reports, it indicated that there's $1.2 billion in sidewalk repair that needs to happen. That means that money, that whooshing sound you hear, is that much, $1.2 billion, coming out of the pocket of property owners. And for homeowners that are many on fixed income, they have no other alternative. They can't raise the cost of their goods like a business can, and even them in these economic times are having difficulty. I'm also concerned about the language. I guess I'll address that in number 4. The 50-50 program was a good program. I think it could have been marketed better, and I think that obviously it's finding the money, but I think that's a carrot rather than a stick. And I think it should be a priority. People are paying tens of thousands of dollars in property taxes. Some of that money should go back to their actual property. And so take some of that money and use that as a carrot, not a stick. Also, I have a problem with the report that was dated February 12, 2008, where it lists the different subcommittees when the studies were done before. The motion by City Council in June of 2007 said include neighborhood councils. I've looked through the list of all of the people on these subcommittees. There's not one self-identified neighborhood council person on this list. Yes, the general manager or persons associated with the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment are there, but that's not the same as having neighborhood council representatives. I don't believe that these subcommittees that looked into these different alternatives fulfilled the intent of the council's motion to include neighborhood councils. Yes, they got the realtors. They certainly got the city agencies. They did not get the neighborhood council folks. Thanks.
Could I, for the record, just to set the record straight, when we were doing the bond concept, it was $2.3 billion, okay, to do that, not 1.2 billion. It was 2.3, so you know the facts. And also property tax, we get 20 cents of every dollar, the city does. The rest goes to the county and the state, so you know what kind of monies we deal with. Not that I disagree with what you were saying. Just wanted to give you
But that's $10,000 that I've given in my property taxes to the city. The $1.2 billion is in a written report from the city. Okay, I'll correct it in the future. I'll put 2.3. Thank you.
Mr. Bailey, you're also up for number 4. You want to address this now?
Okay, thank you. So for number 4, I am representing the Encino Neighborhood Council. I'm Area 1 representative. The Encino Neighborhood Council voted to oppose this proposed ordinance that you have from the city attorney for various reasons, some of which have been covered here already. But I want to just point out one section here, Section 3E, that is in here regarding the payment process by individuals. It says that any costs associated with the repair that is being required by persons shall be a personal obligation of the responsible party, recoverable by the city in an action before any court of competent jurisdiction. These costs shall include an amount equal to 40% of the cost to perform the actual work. What that means is that you're not attaching to people's property and their property taxes. You're going after their personal assets, their bank accounts, garnishing their wages. And you're adding 40% to the cost of doing the work that should have been done all these years ago. That, to me, is outrageous, absolutely outrageous. And this should be not just defeated, this should be torn up, shredded, put into the garbage can. Thank you.
Mr. Dennis Hathaway, last speaker.
Good afternoon. I'm Dennis Hathaway. I'm president of the Coalition to Ban Billboard Blight. But I'm speaking here today as a habitual walker. My dog and I walk anywhere from a mile to 2 miles almost every day. And the dog doesn't actually have much problem. But there are portions of the sidewalk in my neighborhood that are almost impassable and that are so bad that they can in no way be cured with a slathering of asphalt. There are elderly people in my neighborhood. There's a woman in a wheelchair in my neighborhood who gets around. When she goes around, she has to go out into the street. And when I see her and a car coming down the street, I cringe thinking about, does that driver of that car see her? So I'm bringing this up because I think there is a great urgency for the city to deal with this. The ADA lawsuit was mentioned. I'm not a lawyer, but I know that the Ninth Circuit has already ruled that sidewalk accessibility is a valid ADA issue. And the city of Sacramento settled a lawsuit very similar to this lawsuit, and they have to, in their agreement, they devote 20% of their transportation budget to sidewalk repair. And what would that take for the city of LA to take 20% out of the current transportation budget? What would that mean in terms of cuts? I don't have an answer to this. However, I do have a suggestion that could be added to the list. And I see that the street furniture is on the agenda later. The portion of street furniture funds that go to the various council offices, that could be devoted to sidewalk repair. That would be within the spirit of the street furniture revenue fund, and I think it would be a good use of those monies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Koretz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to make a motion that we support number 10 on the list of options, no implementation at this time.
I'll second it.
I guess that would be a motion for Budget Committee since I'm not on Public Works.
So procedurally, how does this work for a joint committee? Do we, Mr. Parks, you've had more experience in hosting joint committees, do we take it as a whole, or does each committee vote? Each committee votes.
It's going to be a joint report. I mean, a joint would be a report that reflects both committees' input.
Oh, okay, so the Budget and Finance Committee would vote separately from Public Works. Okay, well, let's open up that for discussion. And
I'm sorry, what was the...
The motion was to adopt no implementation at this time, option number 10. It was seconded by Mr. Rosendahl, and
I got a point of clarification. Just
Yes,
going back to the original, what the city attorney suggested, that I know it says no implementation at this time, and I support that, but I think the city attorney instructed us, again, if we can get clarification on that at the beginning of the meeting, that because this was a final draft just delivered and not agendized, we could discuss it but not vote on any of the specific items. Can we get clarification on that again?
Well, right now, I mean, by doing nothing, you're simply
what we've been doing.
Continuing the course of action.
The suggestion was to vote on item 10, on an actual item. I absolutely agree with that.
But you could be receiving and filing, you could be, just, asking for further information. You're not necessarily, it's not like other actions where you take an action to literally take an action. You're now just voting to simply continue without any further action.
I could change the wording of my motion to just receive and file the report.
So your action would be to receive and file the report, but there is no report before us. That's Mr. Englander's point. I think your intent, Mr. Koretz, is to receive and file both items number 3 and 4. That's really what you're trying to accomplish.
Mr. Chairman, actually, there are reports before you. The council file includes the prior reports submitted by BOSS. Your committee, the Joint Committee, last year recommended receive and file.
It's to receive and file items 3 and 4. That's the proper way of doing it.
And there is an ordinance before you.
That's number 4.
That's how I understand it. And I'll second Mr. Koretz's motion.
Mr. Parks.
Let me just say, I think if you go down that path, you're going to create even more liability by not altering the ordinance and not fixing the sidewalks. And I think what we asked for was some report backs. I think if you did a little research, you'd find that most cities in the state of California comply with the 1911 Act. So it's not a archaic piece of legislation. Most cities in the state of California follow that direction, and we did until 1970. I think the other thing that we have to look at, that someone mentioned about the change of demographics in the city, that we now have about 35% renters versus 50%. One of the things is homeowners, but nothing has changed in the fact that every home is owned by someone. And this is issue that this is where the price, this is where the cost would go to the homeowner for the cost. It's not to the renter. And I think if we look at what's happened and we could push it off and get a lesser cost sidewalk, but if we can't get these fixed, why do we think every 10 years somebody else is going to fix it? And to say throw it to the next homeowner is the same thing that council members have been doing since 1970, throw it to the next council. And so I think if we continue down that path, we will just continue paying the liability. And again, if that's the path and we receive and file this report, then we should just say to street services, tell people we don't fix sidewalks and don't call back, because that's the only option. And I think, when we go back through this, and I think it's a misnomer to believe that because the downsides of the real estate market, fixing sidewalks is a detriment. Every house I've lived in, having good sidewalks is a plus for the resale value and also for the quality of the neighborhood. So we've seen the real estate industry come in with their list of things they don't want to see. But I think in reality, if you live in the neighborhood, and when somebody mentioned 1970, I just happened to have owned a house in 1970 and fixed my own sidewalks. And so I just think we need to, look at this in the reality of the city. And if we are willing to let sidewalks crumble, and the young man that came up here earlier says he can't walk in his neighborhood, we have no resources to fix it and no solutions, then we are all in the wrong business.
Mr. Corretz?
I think trying to address this long-term at this particular moment in time is the wrong time to be making this decision. In the worst economy that any one of us will see in our lifetimes, I wouldn't object to revisiting this in a year or two. Frankly, at the snail's pace that we've been repairing sidewalks over the last 40 years, it's a stretch to say that we'll really notice the difference if we stopped as opposed to continue to do it at an 86-year pace. So I would be happy to revisit this in a couple of years when we really can see where our economy is headed and how much of a responsibility we want to put on private homeowners and business owners. But putting that responsibility on them right now just seems like the wrong thing. I'm not saying that we should never do it, but I think this is the absolute worst possible time to take this action.
Mr. Englander?
Lastly, I would suggest then, based on that, and I agree, I think it's the worst time to do it. I think Mr. Parks had made some very valid arguments. And the question is, going back to what are our responsibilities as a city, and this is strictly a financial discussion. Having said that, I do believe that there was another issue that was brought up and wasn't really discussed, was the liability issue, that if we take no action, we still have this liability issue hindering out there. And so with that, then I would move to vote down the proposed change of the ordinance to send the liability back to the homeowner and then receive and file item 3 and 4, so we actually take an action.
There's been a motion to vote down the ordinance, which is item number 4. And then note and file item 3 and 4. Is that your motion?
Correct.
Is there a second on that?
Second.
Second. You're our city attorney here. What's the difference between the first motion and the second motion?
The first motion didn't expressly refer to the ordinance, so I think this second motion now takes an action on the ordinance, which is before you in item number 4, and then reiterates what the content of the first motion was.
So if the first one passes, there's no need to take action on the second one, correct?
If the first item passes, you technically you haven't really taken an action on the ordinance yet.
It includes this. Yeah, we don't have to take action on the original motion. Okay, because we're going to take up Mr. Englander's motion first. Let me go ahead. Mr. Alarcon?
Yeah, I think to take no action would be unconscionable, and I don't care what the economy is. We're elected to act, and I don't. Given that this is a new situation, good economy or bad, we've got to do something. We cannot allow for the courts and the liabilities that will be imposed on us to drive this issue. We have to respond, and so while I concur that we can't do all of these things, I think there's some things we should move forward with. So I would move that we look at items number 8 and item number, well, I want to provide a modified option, which is sort of a combination of the 50/50 voluntary sidewalk program and item number 8, which is the explicit enforcement adjacent to sidewalk trip and fall where lawsuits have been filed. In those cases where somebody has sued the city, I believe we should selectively enforce but require that the owner of that property participate in the 50/50 program, where we will pay for those. I would like to explore the ramifications of that kind of program. So it's a combination of us agreeing to go forward and pay 50% of the cost, but we're only doing it in those cases where we're getting sued, and requiring the owners to participate. Secondly, I would like us to explore the feasibility of putting the burden, some of the burden, 33% of the burden, on the people that hold the note for the owning the property. So if Bank of America is the true owner of the property because the actual person that lives there doesn't really own it, I would like us to explore the feasibility of imposing the improvement onto the banks or whoever holds the note for the property. Thirdly, I think that we should develop the number 9 sidewalk repair assessment districts and allow communities to pay for their own if they choose to do so, but do it in a way that they can afford by allowing them to pay over time, either on their sanitation bill or DWP bill, in some way to pay for it over time. I also believe that we should develop standards that would be more cost effective to improve sidewalks, that would allow us to do more creative sidewalk models, that not this peanut butter approach, gray sidewalks everywhere, but allow homeowners and the city to be more creative, but most practically to be more efficient. I think we should also take advantage of whatever programs we can. I understand there's $40 million of unspent ARA money, and I think we should explore the feasibility of diverting some of that money, if at all possible, to improve our sidewalks, to get funding to do some of these programs. I would ask that we not kill this item and take no action. I think the voters would hate to hear that message, but that we continue the matter at a minimum and keep working on it. I mean, the worst thing we could do is stick our head in the sand and hope that we are termed out before anybody complains about this. I'm termed out in 2 years, but this is something that we've got to work on. And while I disagree with Mr. Parks's conclusion that we have to impose it on the homeowner, and I think we should try other options before we go there, I agree with his statement that we can't just sit here and twiddle our thumbs.
I think if I could add on these motions, I think I'm where Mr. Alarcon is. I at this time don't agree that we should put the total burden on the adjacent property owners, but it was my hope that we could throw... I didn't say that. It was my hope that we could just brainstorm as we did, as the department did, throw all these options out, digest it, filter it, and come up with something that makes sense. But to do nothing is a huge mistake. I mean, I ride my bike in my neighborhood, and I guess not all neighborhoods are like mine, but those sidewalks are deplorable. I ride my bike. My kids are riding their bikes. Sometimes I have to stop and see if my kids are going over these huge little hills safely. And I wonder about people with disability access and how they get through these places. It's something that we cannot continue to ignore. To say do nothing, like Mr. Alarcon aptly put it, it's putting our head in the sand. And we got to explore some of these options. Right now, like I said, I don't agree with putting the total burden on the adjacent property owner. But I think if we leave these options open, continue to discuss them, we may come up, politics is the art of compromise. We may come up with something that may, compromise position on all of this stuff. But I was hoping we could just keep this open for now and then come up with some options.
Mr. Chair, could I ask for a second for my motion?
What's your motion?
All those things I said.
Can I comment on a couple of them?
Yeah, what I said was that we get a report back on all of those suggestions. That was my motion.
Yeah, I think we get a report back. I thought we were going to get
a second, Mr. Parks?
Yeah, I'll give you a second. I'll give a report back. But let me just comment, because we've gone through this several times on the issue of the trip and falls on number 8. The shortfall of that is if you have a trip and fall in a claim or a lawsuit, the city is totally responsible, particularly if there is constructive notice that you knew about it before that. You do not have the ability to share that with the property owner if you do not put them on notice. So that's a shortfall there. You're talking about assessment districts. There's some very specific requirements of contiguous property, and also the fact that you must get people to all agree. People have lived around these sidewalks for decades and have not agreed to fix them because we've given them the impression that we're going to fix them. And so I think it keeps getting back. We can discuss it. I think my motion in 2005 was just a third generation of several motions that have come about. But if anybody reads the Street Services 2008 report, it's as clear as anything that I've ever read in the city that we as a city cannot allow this to continue on. And when we talk about core responsibilities, how many of us would like to have $90 million to actually put in our core responsibility? And why are we insistent on paying for something by law is not our responsibility? And I think that's where we're going to have to come to grips with it. But I don't think we can do nothing. And if a report back is the best we can do, then we can read it in 2 months and kick the can again. But I think the real issue is that if you talk to the attorneys about the pending lawsuits, we're just adding more liability to ourselves if we don't alter the ordinance.
Yeah, in voting these down, I would not, those don't suggest at all that we're doing nothing. In fact, I think it actually is doing something. It's sending a statement that we are accepting our responsibility as a city, that we, in fact, should be repairing and funding, fixing these sidewalks. That's doing something. By voting down these alternatives, I think it's taking a bold action, quite frankly, of accepting responsibility. Now it gets into an issue of funding. I realize and understand we don't have the funding right now, and that's why we have to create in the budget our priorities on what we should be funding. When the city voted to close libraries, it was put on the ballot to let the voters decide to open libraries up on Mondays again, and this last Monday, the libraries were reopened. I think a lot of us celebrated that action when we opened those libraries, and that was something the voters did because the city council voted to close the libraries because there was lack of funding. So I don't think this is really an issue of putting it off or kicking the can down the road or not doing something. In fact, I think it's a bold action to vote down these proposals to say that point of sale is a viable option when I think you've heard from most of the committee that we all agree, for the most part, that it's not a viable option. It will never be a viable option to put this on the backs and the burdens of businesses and homeowners and landlords because simply we can't afford to do it. And as I stated before, there's a lot of things we can't afford to do. That doesn't make it any less of our responsibility. So I think by voting down to shift the responsibility in item number 4, which we'll get to, and receiving and filing these proposals is actually taking an action that is long overdue.
I see something. Mr. Parks. Let me just comment. I think that analogy that deals with this libraries is probably not the most appropriate because it didn't cost the homeowner or anyone a dime. All it did was shift the percentage of property taxes that are already in the city. So for them to vote for it, it was a fail-safe. The other issue is, I think that taking the bold action of saying we're responsible and not having a bold step to implement is like going to a gunfight with a nice pick. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. And so I would hope that if we make that bold action and we say to the world that we are responsible, but we're going to do nothing about it, please don't come to a gunfight with me, because you may forget your gun. I mean, so...
Mr. Rosenthal?
Yeah, we won't forget about a gun here, but first I apologize to Glenn Bailey. The $2.3 billion did include streets, and the 1.2 had to do with sidewalks. I apologize for that. Look, the 50-50 program worked in my district. We stopped the 50-50 program because the city had no funds. Okay? Point of sale was attractive a few years ago when the economy was in a much different spot and people were in a different position to deal with it. I think that what we're really facing with now is the liability issue of a sidewalk and the reality that neither the homeowner nor the city has the ability to deal with it. So I think I'm somewhere where it's a bold action, as Mr. Englander is saying, about we're saying we're going to go study this further on one level, but also Mr. Parks isn't wrong, or Mr. Alarcon, or Mr. Weiser either, when they talk about all these issues need to be explored. So where I'm coming out on this is we'll get a report back in 60 days. I think the liability issue has to be resolved, and then we'll see, A, if there's any kind of monies. I do believe that the Safe Cities Route program, there are funds there that can be used for sidewalk repair. I think one of the comments made that maybe this $40 million, as Mr. Alarcon said, of unspent hour money. I think there's ways to see if we can cobble together some funds. But at this point, I don't think anybody should be off the hook, but I don't think anybody should be hooked and fried over the situation at this point, because we're just in no position to do it. So I look for a more thorough report back. As we all know at the committee, we just got this at the beginning of this meeting, and we used this as our talking points in our discussion. So it's a work in progress, and obviously you've heard everybody's opinions about what we think needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we take a vote, there was another public comment card submitted. Jack Comfortville, item number 3.
My name's Jack Humphreyville. I live right by the mayor, and his sidewalks aren't so hot either. I went through the presentation that was in the council file, and I found it thoroughly lacking in details, both with regards to the finances and with regards to the operations. It's just plain poor. And for anybody to ask you to make a decision based on that information is just nothing short of negligent, if not grossly negligent. I think we need to come up with a long-term plan. We're talking about sidewalks that last for 100 years or 80 years or whatever the magic number is. And I think the Board of Public Works needs to be right involved in this. We're paying them $1 million a year, and they ought to be right out there in front of this thing and making sure it's vetted through them. In terms of financing, I would say that this should be bonded. And I would say it'd be a general obligation bond, because these are long-term assets. You've just seen the Department of Water and Power. They're going to start capitalizing some of their expenses related to the solar incentive program. Those are long-term assets. These are long-term assets. I think if you go out there and have a revenue bond, you're going to attack it, sock another whatever it is on my tax bill. I think you'll have a hard time getting this done. I would also say to you that one of the things in doing this is following different alternatives, and those alternatives are outsourcing. For example, it costs I think it used to cost whatever number of dollars a yard it was to do cement. We went out and looked at our place. We went out and got a private contractor, and it was about 35% cheaper than what the city was going to come out and charge us. That's on that 50-50 program. So I think in terms of this, I think the sidewalk guys need to come out with a detailed long-term plan that really addresses this issue, not over the next couple of years, but over the next 30 or 40 years, because this is really a long-term asset, not dissimilar to what we have at the Department of Water and Power. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, let me, on the Public Works Committee, take up the last motion that was made. That was Mr. Alarcon's motion, which essentially said to continue looking at this, to examine in more detail some of the options that he spoke about in the report. And I mean, it's my intention, it's not in the motion, but it's my intention to come back at the end of September if that passes. So as a chair of the Public Works Committee.
Just on item 3?
Will your motion included item 3 and 4? Yeah, items 3 and 4 are both. Yeah. Did you look at those options?
Yeah.
So
I would just ask that we expand the options on the report back so that we can.
Mr. Alarcon, are you okay with just looking at all the options on the report back? Yeah, okay. So that's to continue essentially to continue the item, to look at all the options, to look at them more thoroughly and items both 3 and 4. So on the Public Works Committee, Mr. Alarcon, what's your vote? Mr. Alarcon, yes or no on your own motion? I think I seconded that motion. So what's your yes, Mr. Englander.
Let's continue.
Mr. Alarcon's motion.
On both, is it on 3 and 4?
It's on 3 and 4. Yeah.
Bring all the options back? Well, the options as presented, I'll vote no. Yeah, I would like to bifurcate the question. Yeah.
You want to bifurcate the questions? Okay. Item number 3.
Aye.
And item number 3 is point of sale.
No. All the options.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
just to.
You wanted to bifurcate which
3 and 4. Or was just the liability?
I think what he wants to bifurcate out is the ordinance that we have submitted,
Yeah.
which removes the exception.
Let's do this. Mr. Alarcon has moved to come back to continue discussing all the options, but we will bifurcate.
And the ordinance.
Well, he wants to bifurcate the ordinance now, and he wants to make it a separate motion to come back with the ordinance. So it's essentially a continuation. On the item to come back with the final draft report submitted today, to come back with all those options, what's the vote of the Public Works Committee? Mr. Alarcon made the motion, I seconded, so that's 2 yeses. Mr. Englander?
On item 3, no.
That's to come back with all the options? Okay, no.
On item 3.
Okay, on the,
I know, but
that's not how we're bifurcating them. We're bifurcating them by coming back with all the options, just the options in the report, and the other motion Mr. Alarcon is making to come back with the ordinance that takes out the exception. That's the second motion by Mr. Alarcon. So the first motion is to come back with all the options in the report.
Yeah, I'm a no vote on that.
You're a no vote, okay. Now, the second motion by Mr. Alarcon is to come back on the exceptions on the ordinance. I seconded that motion, Mr. Alarcon made it. That's 2 ayes, and your...
Yeah, that's the one I'd like to vote on today, and so I'd vote no.
A no on that, so, you know.
Yeah. Okay, vote on that one.
So in the Public Works Committee, we will continue to discuss the options items and the ordinance, and we will continue to discuss those items, Public Works. Mr.
As far as the Budget Finance, as far as the first option is to come back with a report on all of the options. I'll support that.
No.
And the other ones I discussed.
Yeah, the other one.
Right, I'm a no vote on that.
Yes.
Yes, so that's 3-2 on coming back with the ordinance with the exceptions. Correct?
No.
Yes.
Yes, 3-2?
No.
No, okay, 3-2 on both, on Budget and Finance.
All right. So I don't think we need to take a vote on the other items. Those are note and filed. We pretty much come out and vote the same way.
Yeah, can I just make a
Yes.
public? Mr. Humperville, I just want to, Mr. Humperville? Mr. Humperville, I just want to comment on your comment, just so that we're clear. On you commented on the report here today, that's not the total amount of information. If you look in council file, there are reams of material, so that report is not a standalone report. The expectation is, as we look at this, it's about 2 or 3 inches of material to support. Okay, all right.
I just found it very hard to look.
Okay, but the thing is, if you look at the 2008 report, that clarifies most of the issues.
Okay, to be clear, before we move on these items, what we did today as an action item was to ask the departments to come back and continue to explore these options. And both the ordinance and the report that was submitted today, although not in the motion, I intend, with the cooperation of Mr. Parks as the chair of the Budget and Finance Committee, is to come back at the end of September to discuss these items further. That is the action that was taken. There was no action taken on any specific option. There was no action taken on the ordinance, on the exception, but we will come back and further discuss them in September. That's essentially where we are. Okay. Thank you. And we will now go on to item number 5. Before we do that, Clerk, Mr. Alarcon wants to be counted as a yes on both item number 1 and 2. We could do that, please? Yes. And item number 5 is a city administrative officer report on the status of the street furniture program and how this program impacts city revenues.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. John Chavez with the CAO's office. The street furniture item that you see before you first came up as a CLA question in the Budget and Finance hearings. It's also part of the recap of the Budget and Finance Committee report. Just a very brief background on this issue, street furniture. Back in 2001, the council approved a 20-year contract with CBS Deco to implement a street furniture program. And what we mean by street furniture, of course, we're talking about public toilets, we're talking about newsstands, kiosks, transit shelters, and the like. We were asked to report back and on the status of the program and revenues. This is pretty broad direction, so we would appreciate and we'd find it very helpful if the committees can give us a little bit more direction on what they'd like to see in that report. You should also know that Street Services is going to be coming back with a report of their own, updating the council on the status of the program. We're 10 years into this contract, so this would be a 10-year status report. I'm prepared to give you a brief rundown of where we are with the program. Otherwise...
Well, let's hold on. So the report has not been completed. Is that correct?
Pardon me, Councilman?
Has the report been completed?
It has not been completed, no.
When do you anticipate that the report will be completed?
I would love to get some feedback on what you'd like in that report. Otherwise, I can prepare a report in 45 days if the committees are okay with that.
Okay.
Can we have it back in September when we have this other item?
Yes, it could be back by then. But I would like to clarify that Street Services will be coming back with their own 10-year report. It might be answering a lot of the same issues relative to the update on the program and revenues. If you'd like our report to follow that one, we can do that as well.
When will the Street Services report be completed? Do you know? They're not here.
I would defer to Street Services on that.
Mm-hmm.
Good afternoon, Lance Luisha, the Bureau of Street Services. The report that is required by the contract is a mutual report between both ourselves and CBS Co, who is our contractor. Right now, we're going back and forth on that to mutually agree to the language. We anticipate that we should have our final draft ready perhaps within the next month, so 30 days. We believe we can possibly come back with you with a final report.
Why don't we take both those reports back up in September when we schedule this other item on the sidewalks. In the interim, if you need more direction on what you would like to see in those reports, you could contact my office and the chair of Budget and Finance. This was a directive from the Budget Committee during the budget deliberations, and so we could get more clarification between now and then.
Let me just comment. The thing that's of most interest that came out of the Budget Committee is, number one, Mr. Smith put forth a plan for how this system should work and how council districts could not opt out.
Mm-hmm.
And that plan got lost somewhere.
That's correct.
And what's caused this program to be diminished is the council offices have refused to cooperate, which has reduced our revenue significantly, yet they continue to share in the revenue that's given to each office, which in my judgment is unfair if you're not going to participate. And if you look at the file, you find every reason not to cooperate, and it just sits there and basically stagnant. And so the whole purpose of us bringing it up is that we are short of revenue, that we want to maximize the revenue, but what we should be doing is looking at the liability for offices refusing to cooperate and putting mandates in place that says you get 2 or 3 options of locating. If you don't, as Mr. Smith's plan went, if you don't find in 2 or 3 times, then it gets imposed upon you. You can't hold up the whole city on a contract that we've had for 20 years to say, I'm not going to play, and therefore we're going to lose half the money that's forthcoming. And that's what we're trying to break loose, is that everybody has responsibility, and one of the caveats should be if you don't cooperate fully, you shouldn't get 1/15 of the share of the money that's coming into the council, because you're the one that's deteriorating the program. So that's what my concerns are, that we need to go back and find that plan and make it mandatory. I mean, I've not seen where the city signs a contract and somebody decides, I don't want to play, so therefore I'm going to impair negatively the whole city because I don't want in my districts bus benches with signs on them.
Okay.
Now, and then when people start asking, do they fit the sign ordinance, that's just grappling for a reason not to cooperate. So that's what our mission was. We want to maximize the revenue. We want everybody to participate, but we don't believe that the folks that are not participating should share in the revenue.
Could I ask something, the committee? Could we ask this be a joint report with the CLA?
Yes, please.
Okay,
We could have the CLA help out. And Mr. Englander and then Mr. Alarcon.
Yes, and I recall this in the Budget Committee as well, as Mr. Parks had just stated clearly, and I believe there was support from the Budget Committee on this, that there was a plan that Councilman Smith brought forward, that there would be 2 or 3 locations, I believe that was suggested as part of Mr. Parks' committee at the time during the budget process, and if the council member at the time, I think there was a time certain, where they had to respond, either to select one of those choices or come up with an alternative that made sense within a specified time, then it would default if they didn't make the decision to that location. Do we need a specific instruction as a motion to implement that process? Because I know it was done as part of budget.
I think what we need is them to go get that plan and bring it back.
I've seen it. I think it's expired, that particular council file. There was no action on it. It's dead. And so we would have to resurrect that particular issue. It's my understanding. Is that right?
Yeah, that should be part of the report, is find that file.
Well, okay, to find the file, but what you were saying is it's dead for lack of action.
Yes.
So we'd have to resurrect it in the form of a new motion.
Or a report.
Or instruction or report.
Or you could incorporate it into the report.
That's correct.
Make it alive that way.
That's correct.
Excellent.
Lance is going to come back with a report, too, so...
But I'm saying, we want the Smith report to be brought back so we can see what the elements and why, not only why it wasn't implemented, but to look at it to implement it in the future, because otherwise we're losing revenue.
Mr. Alarcon?
Yeah, I think we should have some compliance provisions, so that if a council member doesn't allow the program to move forward and it undermines the quality of the program, then they shouldn't share in the street furniture fund. And I think we just, if we can perhaps identify a group to make that determination, then I think the program would run much more smoothly than it did for the last, 20 years or 15 years?
Yeah, we have 10 more years left on the contract, yeah.
10 more years,
10 more years
left on the contract.
Thank you. We have 2 public speakers.
Yeah, wait a minute, I'd like to comment.
Oh, Mr.
Yeah, just for the record, to make it very clear, in our district, the 11th district, and also in the 5th district, and to some degree, the 13th district, we have been assaulted with those billboards, and yet the money is equally divided among all 15 council districts. We've had enough in our district, and they just think that the white folk in the west side is where they put them up, and everybody else participates in it. When I first came to office, we went out of our way to put more of the street furniture in our district in areas where I worked with the community groups, the neighborhood groups, and then we reached a point where they had enough. And they did have enough, and frankly, I've had enough. It becomes blight, not a plus. And that's the level I'm at. And I don't think it's fair. This was done by Ron Deaton when the 15 council members couldn't work together, that it would be equally, the monies would be equally divided among 15 districts. And the money is equally divided among 15 districts. That's the law. But yet the impact is dramatic in my district compared to most of the other districts. Some of them don't have any, yet they get that kind of money. So we went out of our way and absolutely upped the participation, and we did it to the point where our cup runneth over in our community. The Dennis Hathaways of the world, you can multiply through my 300,000 constituents who've had enough of this. So I just want to be clear and on the record that there's no fairness in this financial distribution after the money comes in, but there's just no fairness in the fact that we've been overly assaulted with these billboards. And I had said it to the street furniture people, and they appreciated what I was saying. They had their own marketing directives that suggested that the folks in my district and Mr. Koretz's and, maybe Mr. Labange as well as Mr. Garcetti were the ones that had a dramatic amount of these billboards. So I certainly want to appreciate the reality of where we're at, and I just want to make sure people understand. And I'd like to see, frankly, a report back in the report backs of exactly where all these billboards are, in whose districts, how many are impacted. And then obviously I want us to be appreciated for the work we did. But at this point in time, I think the other districts and the group doing this need to take a new look at some of the other areas of the city and have a little bit of fairness when it comes to the distribution.
We'll incorporate, I think we already have much of that information already, so we'll share that, of course, with the committees.
Great, thanks.
And Mr. Roosevelt, I assume then if you got a bigger share, you'd be less offended.
Well, first of all, my constituents are offended, and I'm offended too. I'm tired of seeing some of these commercials.
I was trying to figure out which one it was. Is it the dollars?
Okay, we have two public speakers, and then we'll adjourn the meeting. The first is Dr. Williams.
But he did do a lot.
Okay, Dr. Williams is not here. Dennis Hathaway, last speaker.
Let's do that.
Yeah. No, we're good. We're going to continue the item.
Good afternoon again. My comments aren't directed directly to the revenue, but to the contract itself. A couple weeks ago, in an afternoon, I drove down Pico Boulevard from Westwood Boulevard to La Brea, down La Brea to Venice Boulevard and back west on Venice Boulevard to Sepulveda, and I counted and documented, photographically documented, 48 outdoor advertisements for alcohol. And 16 of those alcohol advertisements were on street furniture, either bus shelters or kiosks. And over the past year, I've been photographing these things when I see them, and I've got over 40 just randomly alcohol ads in street furniture. Studies have shown that exposure to alcohol advertising increases drinking, increases alcohol abuse, particularly among our youth. And it also costs the city millions of dollars in cost, in law enforcement costs, in lost productivity, in other kind of medical costs. I think that the MTA does not allow alcohol advertising on any of its buses or trains. The Board of Public Works just approved a new contract for bus bench advertising, and they included a prohibition on alcohol advertising. There's an RFP out right now for city bus advertising for the dash buses and the commuter expresses. That has a prohibition on alcohol advertising. I understand that this is a contract that runs for another 10 years, and any changes in this contract would have to be by mutual agreement of the city and CBS-DECO. But I would hope the city would consider opening some negotiations with CBS-DECO and to do the right thing. It's constitutional, and to limit this alcohol advertising. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, we'll continue this item till the next meeting, the Joint Budget and Finance Public Works. This is a very good meeting. Thank you all for your attention. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Hey, Lance.